Welcome back. If you haven't watched the mobile apps video where I went over defining the styles for the music streaming app and the finance app, please watch it just so that I don't repeat myself and kind of go over the same things again and again and again. I am going to try to make this video a little bit shorter and actually focus on what's specific when we're working with web app typography versus like creating styles in general. Recommendation definitely is to watch the mobile video first and then kind of continue on and watch this one and the responsive website after it. When we're working with web app typography, we're most likely working with larger screen sizes, and we're also not always going to work with something that's going to be responsive. But even if it is, since you're working with web apps, there's going to be a lot of data that needs to be shown on the screen. So most often, even the sizes that you're using for desktops should translate really, really well onto smaller sizes like tablets and mobile. There is not a lot of responsive thinking that needs to go on when you're working on web apps. You should be focusing on other attributes besides size, just because there's so much data that needs to be shown in the screen. With web apps, it's often less about scrolling and more about clicking and navigating to other areas of the screen. So that's why you're going to be working with a smaller range of sizes, and you're gonna need to focus on other things to introduce the contrast. If there are any limitations, maybe you are planning to introduce some kind of a responsive thinking into everything, discuss the limitations with developers just to see if any exist. Most often than not, there's not going to be any major limitations that you need to think of, but still, it's something that I highly recommend. Also, one other thing, when you're working with web app typography, you need to be thinking about the web fonts that are going to be used, and that brings me to the point of like free versus paid typeface, and more often than not, you're going to be leaning towards free options in projects like this that are already well equipped to handle web situations. So you might look into Adobe fonts or like Google fonts or something where you have a license to really easily use that typeface on the web. The app that I decided to kind of go through with you today is a project management app. I took a couple of screenshots from Mobbin or Asana, and you can already see there is some kind of a style for the navigation in here, maybe 2 levels for some of these actions. There's one size in here, the other one in here, the same one in here, but in different color. Maybe the weight is also a little bit different, unsure. This feels like medium, this feels like regular. Maybe it's just color tricking me into thinking that's the case. You can see in here we have some kind of a main heading style. Overall, these sizes feel pretty similar to these sizes. This is a little bit smaller. So there's like 3 to 4 levels of sizes that are used, and then everything else is done through styling of text, either through color or the weight. Similar things in here. This size feels similar to this size. This is the only other size that I have in here that is not seen on this screen, and it's a little bit bigger. So basically this is something like a main heading versus all of these other things being some kind of secondary headings and subheadings. In here, we once again have 1 style, 2nd style, 3 sizes, maybe 4 sizes. I'm not sure if this is a screenshot or not, but if not, then this would be like a 5th size that we have on the screen. Airtable, I really like this example. It's really data heavy. There's a lot of text in here, not a lot of other visual elements. So we have 1 size, 2nd size. Let's see, this all feels pretty similar. This is a 3rd size that's bigger than all of these, maybe a 4th size. So overall, this feels like the 5th size. So overall, in all of these examples, like 4 to 5 font sizes is something that we should definitely strive to have covered, and it should give us enough flexibility to actually work and create visual hierarchy in here. 1 level, 2nd level, this is the same size, just not bold. Maybe this is bigger than this is, so that's 3 levels, and unsure if in here it's the same size but just a little bit bolder or not. Yeah, again, 3 to 4 levels on a screen. If we think about it, I went with Inter as the typeface that we're going to use for a web app. I know it's a pretty common choice, but it just works for interfaces like this. It's very legible. It's kind of narrow, so a lot more text fits in, which is never a bad thing when you're working with web apps. There's not a lot of like branding and feeling that I need in a use case like this, so I think it's going to be a good choice for us. And if we're thinking about everything that we just saw in these examples, I do envision this requiring like maybe a large typeface for something like this. So like a main title that's going to be used or something like this, and this feels like it's going to cover that size pretty well. So let's call this main or like heading large. Maybe we can use medium just to kind of signal that more. I'm not going to use really bold sizes in here, and since it's so big, I might add a little bit of negative character spacing to it. Then let's define heading small. I'm just gonna make all of this left align, because when I'm working with type, it's the easiest way to kind of compare what we're working with. And I feel like I'm gonna create line height of 40. I feel like a lot of the buttons that we're gonna use in interfaces like this are probably gonna be somewhere around that size. And sorry, since I'm working with auto layout in here, I'm just gonna break it off for demo purposes in here. Let me see the range of sizes in here. So it's probably around 30. I made these a little bit smaller than they are usual. Probably somewhere around 30 to 40 is gonna be the sizes that are gonna be used for these buttons. Really small ones. Most of them are not like main buttons that you're gonna see, so I still feel like something around 40 should be enough. Like 32 to 40, maybe 32 is gonna be used for our smaller buttons, and then if we have larger buttons to confirm some of the main actions, something like 40 to 48 should be a safe range. And it's a little bit smaller than some of the touch target recommendations that you're going to see online, but that's because we're not actually using touch in here. We're thinking about use case of a mouse, and mouse is a lot more precise than our fat fingers are. 40 to 48 is usually a good size for the main buttons in web applications, and then some of those smaller actions and tags, something like 30-ish should be fine. Let's call this heading small. I think I'm gonna make it a little bit smaller though. I feel like this is okay. Gonna bring in more of that character spacing by moving it from -2 to -1, and maybe that can also be regular. Yeah, I think I'm gonna leave it at medium. Perfect. Subheadings, I think I'm still gonna leave it medium, but I feel like this one is somewhere in between these, so that should work. For sizes below 24, I'm not sure I'd consider those so big that they would require character spacing. So I think we have heading, like the main large heading covered, heading small, subheading large, subheading small. I think those are going to be enough. Let's now switch to paragraphs and body text. I think something like 17 can work for bigger paragraph. Just because I know that I'm going to need it, I'm going to introduce bold, but you don't have to use bold. So in here I'm using semi-bold, and I think that's enough of a contrast between these two to know that this one is kind of bolder. And I'm gonna duplicate those, and I'm gonna use something like this. Now, one thing that I might think is, if I'm gonna be using those as input field text, maybe I'm actually gonna go into 16s, because if I have my paragraph small as the main kind of input field text, which I shouldn't, I'm probably going to use this. If I make it smaller than 16, then on iOS and some of the devices, it might zoom into it if it's going to be a responsive app. So I'm only going to be thinking about it if this app that I'm working on is going to be responsive. But for now, I think that if I use 16, then this one would have to be something like 18, and I don't think I'm going to need it. So I'm probably going to use paragraph large for all of the input sizes, and that's going to be enough to ensure that there's no zooming in and zooming out on some of these apps. Let me see, 15 times 1.5 is 22. Like 24 is not too much. I think I'm gonna leave it just because I know I might use icons that are gonna be at the size of 24. So line height, ideally you would have 16 with 24 for this to work. But I also know that in dashboard, it's not like I'm gonna have like big chunks of text that I really need to read through a lot. So maybe even something like 15, 20 could work. I'm gonna leave it like this for now. I know that I'm definitely gonna have some captions and some of the more smaller text. I'm gonna leave it at 14 right now. I might introduce more character spacing into this for descriptions and captions. Not sure if I need 2 weights for it, but I might. So yeah, that might be introduced later on. And let me see what else I might need. Definitely when you're working with dashboards and web applications, a label is needed. I'm definitely gonna have some button text that needs to be styled, maybe a little bit bolder. Some of the tags might be needed. Maybe this could be good enough for a tag. I think that's gonna work well. Is this a different style? 13? Yes, it is. And it definitely doesn't need the character spacing when it's in a tag. Tag text could live in here next to the labels. It can also be used for some kind of data visualizations because numbers like 13, 12, those are only going to be used on those smaller sizes and there needs to be a lot of contrast there. So yeah, the only other thing might be something like navigation on the left side, and honestly, something like a label can also work for those. I might just duplicate it and call it navigation text just to have it as a style. And if that needs to be changed, so I can easily change it without it impacting all of the other labels that I'm going to use in my design. But overall, I'm pretty happy with it. And maybe we can demo it like this. Let's see. Honestly, just because I worked on so many dashboards and web applications and like data heavy interfaces, I already know that the sizes that I picked in here are probably going to be really solid default. So I don't want to dive in too deep into it. Using it in context and trying to figure out like how it's all going to work together is definitely a high recommendation that I do have for you. But overall, from experience, I already feel like this is going to be a really solid draft to start working with. And then if a use case appears where I need to introduce a new style or remove some of these ones, again, as always, I would do that. Now, one thing that I didn't do with the mobile apps is I didn't kind of already create styles from it. I think this is going to be enough, so I can definitely kind of go in here and create those. So this one would be subheading, and I would have it as small. And since I don't have different weights for it, this would just be it. I would probably enter my kind of envisioned use case. If more than one level of subheading is needed, this is the style for it. And kind of save it. And when it comes to things like this, I would probably just create it as paragraph, large, regular, because in here I have regular and bold as weights. So that's how I would define the styles for it. And I think that's all that's needed for a demo of a web app kind of setting of styles. I hope this process helped you understand how I approach setting the styles for a new project and how looking at examples from real life apps that are working in a similar areas can help you understand what kind of levels and differences you're going to need when you're first starting out. Then when you create a screen or 2 or 5 ideally, and kind of test them around with real content that's going to be needed for an app like this, you can really see if the styles that you kind of set up early on are going to work for you, how many modifications are needed, if at all, and if you're using all of those styles or if some are redundant, or also if you need more because you don't have enough of variation to actually work with an interface that's in front of you. So yeah, I hope you like this video and I can't wait to see you in the next one.